Argentina took out too many loans. Their economy fell apart. After that, they did it again, and again, and again. 9 times in all, Greece borrowed too much money. Their economy fell apart. Their GDP fell by a terrible 25%. A whole generation packed their bags and left the country for good. The Ottoman Empire borrowed a lot of money. They lost all their money. Their whole empire fell apart. For 40 years, their tax money went straight to European banks. Mexico took out too many loans. Brazil followed the same path. Venezuela came next. In the 1980s, the whole continent of Latin America went through an economic collapse. Historians call it the lost decade. Can you see the pattern forming here? Because the bankers are sure to see it. They've seen this same movie play out over 100 times in the past. They always know exactly how it will end. And every time someone hits the replay button, they make billions of dollars. There is a pattern in human history. A trap that is so clear and well documented that economists can accurately predict when it will close on its victim years in advance. Politicians take out big loans. They spend it without thinking. They promise their people wealth that will last forever. The people cheer and celebrate, and then, without fail, the bill comes. Every time, the sequence plays out the same way. First, the country goes through a crisis. It could be a war. It could be a very bad recession. Some kind of sudden event that shakes the whole system. The loan offer comes next. Foreign banks come forward. International banks and other financial institutions show up. Rich countries offer money on terms that seem fair. Politicians tell everyone that it's just a temporary solution. We'll grow our economy fast enough to pay it all back. But economic growth never comes fast enough to keep up. The debt starts to build on itself. The payments on the interest grow like a balloon. And all of a sudden, the country that borrowed money to get out of one crisis finds itself stuck in an even worse one. The IMF shows up with briefcases full of spreadsheets. They make the country go through tough times of austerity. There are violent riots in the streets. And in the end, the country doesn't keep its promises. The financial records are closed. The creditors let go of their losses and move on. The economy falls apart and goes into chaos. And then, unbelievably, that same country does it all over again just 10 years later. I'm not making this up. This is the real story of Argentina, Greece, the Ottoman Empire, and a whole continent in the 1980s. This is the harsh truth about the debt trap cycle. And the scariest part, it is still going on right now, today. Argentina is the clear winner when it comes to sovereign debt default. 9 times. 9 times in history, the Argentine government told its creditors, "We can't pay you back." To understand why this keeps happening, you have to go back to their golden age. Argentina was really rich in 1930, not just well-off, but really wealthy. They had the 10th highest GDP per person in the world. More money than France, more money than Germany. The Pampas grasslands grew a lot of wheat and beef that could be sent to other countries. Millions of European immigrants came to the country. Buenos Aires built opera houses and beautiful boulevards to compete with Paris, but beneath all that visible wealth was a serious structural flaw. Argentina's whole economy depended on selling agricultural goods to European markets. And when World War I caused a lot of problems for trade around the world, small cracks began to show up in the foundation. When the Great Depression hit the whole world, those cracks turned into huge chasms. The first default happened in 1827, just 10 years after the country became independent from Spain. Argentina borrowed a lot of money from British banks to pay for its war with Brazil. They weren't able to make the payments. The second default happened in 1890, when the government borrowed huge amounts of money to build railroads and other infrastructure all over the country. A huge financial bubble grew and then popped with a bang. Baring Brothers, a well-known London bank, almost went out of business because it had so much money tied up in Argentine bonds. But it was until the 20th century that Argentina really learned how to master and perfect this vicious cycle. A military coup in 1930 violently overthrew the government that had been elected by the people. To pay off its debts, the new military government just printed more money. Inflation got way out of hand. Juan Perón's populist government took over whole industries in 1951 and gave workers a lot of benefits. There was a short boom in the economy. Then the bill for the money came in the mail. In 1956, default happened. The pattern of destruction happened again and again with clockwork precision. Take out huge loans to pay for national growth. Feel great about short-term economic growth. Don't pay any attention to the debt that's building up in the background. Not meeting your obligations. Change the terms of the debt. Start the cycle over again. Argentina had a terrible time in the 1980s. Latin America as a whole was literally drowning in debt that it couldn't pay back. But somehow, even in that disaster, Argentina was still special. Every year, inflation shot up to a crazy 3,000%. A military junta borrowed billions of dollars to pay for an invasion of the Falkland Islands. A war they lost in a big and embarrassing way. Argentina defaulted again in 1982, this time owing an unbelievable $43 billion to its creditors. President Carlos Menem somehow got the whole world to believe that. Argentina had finally learned its painful lesson in the 1990s. He linked the Argentine peso directly to the US dollar. He sold off state-owned businesses that were too big. Foreign investment money flowed into the country like a river. It was like 1913 all over again for Buenos Aires, which celebrated. But that currency peg was really a deadly trap in disguise. To keep the peg going, Argentina had to keep borrowing more and more dollars. The whole game was finally over by 2001. The government suddenly put a stop to all bank accounts across the country. There were violent riots all over the country. In just 2 weeks, 5 different presidents quickly took over the job. In December 2001, Argentina failed to pay back a shocking $93 billion in debt, which was the biggest sovereign default in history at the time. But what really sets Argentina apart is that they did it. Again in 2020, Argentina defaulted for the 9th time in their history during the COVID pandemic crisis, when they couldn't make any payments. Why does this nightmare keep happening over and over again? The answer has to do with both economics and politics working together. Argentina's economy still heavily relies on exporting goods. When the prices of goods around the world are high, dollars come into the country easily. The money flow stops completely when those prices drop. But a harmful cycle of populism has taken over the political system completely. Every government says it will spend more, give out more subsidies, and offer better benefits than the economy can actually handle. The only way to keep those promises is to borrow money. The huge debt isn't a flaw or error in the system. For Argentina's politicians, it's something they depend on. Today's expensive promises will cost future governments a lot of money. And when those future governments can't pay, they default, change everything, and start the cycle over again. The real tragedy is that regular people in Argentina are the ones who have to pay the terrible price for all of this. A generation that should have been rich and successful because Argentina has so many natural resources and a well-educated population is instead living in constant instability, watching their life savings disappear and their country become a joke around the world. Argentina's defaults are new and happen a lot, but the Ottoman Empire's bankruptcy in 1875 changed the course of world history forever. It was the start of the end for one of the biggest empires in history. The Ottoman sultans ruled over lands from Vienna to Yemen, Algeria to Iraq, and everywhere in between for 400 years. They didn't get money for their treasury by taking out loans. They got it by conquering other countries. Newly conquered lands meant new ways to get tax money. The system worked perfectly as long as the empire kept growing. But by the 1800s, growth had come to a complete stop. The empire was getting smaller and smaller, which was even worse. Greece was able to win its freedom. Egypt was able to govern itself and be independent. The Balkans were always fighting against Ottoman rule, and each time they did, they had to send a costly army to put it down. It costs a lot of money to keep armies. European bankers come in with a good deal. In the 1850s, Ottoman sultans learned that they could borrow a lot of money from banks in London, Paris, and Vienna. At first, the loan terms seemed very fair, the interest rates seemed low, and the money was supposed to be used to pay for modernization projects. New railways, telegraphs, and roads that are up to date. The Ottoman Empire would change into a modern, industrialized country and get so rich that it could easily pay back everything with interest. Sultan Abdulaziz borrowed money without thinking twice about it. The Ottoman government gave out loans worth a huge £200 million between 1854 and 1874. This was an unbelievable amount of money at the time. A lot of the money that was borrowed didn't go to useful infrastructure. It went to luxury goods, building new palaces, paying for the sultan's and his court's lavish way of life, paying off provincial governors to stay loyal to the central government. By 1875, more than half of the Ottoman government's income was going only to pay interest on the debt that had built up. Not paying off the principal amount, only paying the interest. The situation was completely impossible to keep going financially. In October 1875, the Ottoman government made a public announcement that shocked European financial markets all over the world. We can only pay you half of what we owe you. They didn't fully meet their obligations. The effects were immediate and very bad for the economy. European lenders wanted to be in charge of the Ottoman Empire's finances. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration was officially set up in 1881. It was a European-controlled agency that took over whole parts of the Ottoman economy. The money made from selling tobacco, salt, silk, and alcohol went straight to European creditors before it ever got to the Ottoman treasury. The empire was very embarrassed by what happened. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was no longer in charge of his own country's money. European bureaucrats literally sat in offices in Istanbul, collecting taxes from Ottoman subjects to pay back European banks, but the damage went far beyond just the economy. The empire's reputation and legitimacy were completely destroyed by the debt crisis. People living in the Balkans who were subject to taxes saw their money going to foreign creditors and began to wonder, why should we stay loyal to this state that is going bankrupt? Nationalist movements for independence grew very quickly all over the empire. The empire somehow kept going for another 40 years, but it was like a dead body being held up by European loans and the need to keep the peace. When World War I finally started, the Ottomans sided with Germany. One reason was that they really needed German loans to stay alive. They lost the war badly. When the empire finally fell apart completely in 1923, its huge debts were split up among the new states that took over. About 60% of the total Ottoman debt burden fell to modern-day Turkey. The fall of the Ottoman Empire is a dark and important lesson for the world. Debt doesn't just make countries go broke. It also takes away their independence. If you owe a lot of money to foreign creditors, they don't just own your money and treasury. They own you completely. If Argentina is the country that keeps defaulting on its debts and the Ottoman Empire is the warning story, then the Latin American debt crisis of the 1980s is the disaster that showed this bad pattern was everywhere. The first thing that happened was a rise in oil prices. OPEC started a terrible embargo in 1973. Prices for oil around the world went up 4 times in one night. All of a sudden, Middle Eastern countries that make oil had a lot of cash on hand. They put billions of dollars into banks in the West. Those banks really needed a place to lend all that money so they could make interest on it. They looked south at countries that were still growing. For the whole decade of the 1970s, Latin American governments borrowed huge amounts of money. Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Venezuela all borrowed a lot of money from banks in the US and Europe. The sales pitch was very simple and convincing. These are economies that are growing very quickly. They are growing very quickly in terms of money. They'll be able to pay back the loans easily because they are growing. The borrowed money was used for infrastructure projects, industrial development programs, and too often, corruption and capital flight out of the country. The whole system worked well as long as the world economy kept growing and interest rates stayed low. Then, in 1979, everything changed. The U.S. Federal Reserve raised interest rates to levels never seen before in American history in an effort to stop inflation from getting out of control. The prime lending rate went up to a crazy 21%. Suddenly, Latin American countries with variable rate debt saw their interest payments double and then triple almost overnight. At the same time, the world economy went into a deep recession. There was no longer any demand for Latin American exports like copper, coffee, oil, and grain. Prices for exports fell through the floor. The money that was supposed to come in to pay off the debts just vanished. In August 1982, Mexico dropped an economic bomb on the world, and the Mexican finance minister flew to Washington right away to deliver a very simple message. We can't pay our bills. Mexico owed $80 billion and had no money left. It was clear that default was going to happen. There was complete panic in the world's financial markets. If Mexico really did default, the big American banks that lent them money would go out of business. Mexico wasn't the only country in this crisis. Brazil had to pay back $87 billion. Argentina owed $43 billion. The whole continent was technically bankrupt. In Latin American history, what happened next is called the Lost Decade. The IMF and World Bank gave out emergency loans, but only under very harsh conditions. Governments had to cut public spending by a lot, cut subsidies to citizens, raise taxes by a lot, and let tough foreign competition into their protected economies. The loss of life was truly shocking and heartbreaking. During the 1980s, real wages in Mexico fell by 40%. In Brazil, inflation went up to an insane 2,700% a year. The economy in Argentina got 10% smaller in just 1 year. Poverty rates in all of Latin America reached all-time highs. A whole generation saw their way of life fall apart. The political effects were just as deep and destabilizing. The debt crisis put a lot of stress on countries that had only recently become democracies to see if those weak democracies could really last. In some cases, like Argentina in 1982, they just didn't make it. Military coups were started and justified by saying that harsh authoritarian measures were needed to deal with the economic crisis. Venezuela, which used to be the richest country in all of Latin America because of its huge oil wealth, had violent riots in 1989. The government tried to raise gas prices to meet strict IMF demands, and hundreds of people died. The crisis finally started to get better in the early 1990s when the U.S. Nicholas Brady, the Secretary of the Treasury, started what came to be known as the Brady Plan. It changed the way the huge amount of debt was structured, forgiving some of it and spreading the remaining payments over longer periods of time. But the damage that would last forever had already been done. Latin America lost 10 years of economic growth and development. The economy's growth stopped completely. There was no more foreign investment. A lot of people became poor. And here's the part that makes you mad. The banks that gave out those very risky loans, governments saved them. The terrible price was paid by the governments of Latin America and their suffering people. The bankers went home with all their money and no harm done. Now let's move ahead to 2010. The story moves to Europe, which has been the richest and most economically connected region in all of human history. Surely, the hard lessons from Argentina, the Ottomans, and Latin America had finally been learned and understood, right? They definitely hadn't learned them. Greece officially adopted the euro as its national currency in 2001 when it joined the eurozone. This was supposed to be Greece's golden ticket to wealth, access to very low interest rates, full integration with rich European economies, and a permanent end to the inflation and currency devaluation cycles that had hurt Greece for decades. But there was a big problem hiding underneath. Countries had to meet strict requirements for their total debt and deficit spending levels in order to be able to join the euro. Greece didn't really meet those requirements at all. That means the Greek government just lied about their numbers. Greece used clever accounting tricks to hide the true size of its huge deficit from regulators, with direct help from investment banks like Goldman Sachs. For 10 years, this trick worked perfectly. Greece and Germany both borrowed money at the same low interest rates. A lot of money came into the country. The government hired a lot of people to work in the public sector, greatly increased pension benefits, and spent a lot of money on hosting the Athens Olympics, which at the time were the most expensive Olympic Games ever. But the 2008 global financial crisis completely destroyed the illusion. Investors who were worried suddenly took a close look at Greece's real financial records. They saw that the total amount of debt was huge, $300 billion, or about 130% of GDP, and it was still growing quickly. Greece couldn't just devalue its currency to get rid of its debt, which was even worse. It was stuck in the euro currency system for good. Greece publicly said in 2010 that it couldn't pay its debts. The EU and IMF quickly put together a huge $110 billion bailout package. But there were some really bad conditions that came with it. Greece had to cut its government spending by 20% right away. Wages in the public sector were cut by a lot. The benefits of pensions were cut a lot. Everyone had to pay more in taxes. Unemployment shot up to 27%, which is higher than what the US saw during the Great Depression. These steps didn't just help the Greek economy stay stable. It fell apart completely. In just 5 years, GDP fell by a shocking 25%. An unbelievable 60% of young people were out of work. The number of suicides reached an all-time high. Hospitals ran out of all the basic medicines. The whole middle class lost all their money. Angry protesters fought with police in the streets. "We don't owe anything," they chanted over and over. "We will pay nothing." Syriza, a far-left party, won the national elections by promising to completely reject the harsh terms of the bailout. But when they tried to do it, the European Central Bank told Greece's banks that they would stop giving them money completely. Syriza gave up and surrendered when they saw that their economy was going to be completely destroyed. Greece was still deep in debt after 3 separate bailouts, which added up to $289 billion. In a technical sense, Greece never officially defaulted on its debts to its official government creditors. But in 2012, it forced private bondholders to restructure their debts voluntarily, which cut the value of their investments by 75%. It was a default in every way but name, and it was the biggest default in history. Greece is very different from Argentina because Greece couldn't control its own money. Argentina could print pesos without any restrictions, lower the value of the currency, and start the cycle all over again. Greece was stuck in the euro system for good. The only way out was to cut spending so much that it ruined the economy. Greece had officially left the bailout programs by 2018, but the deep scars are still easy to see. The economy is smaller now than it was in 2001. A whole generation of well-educated young Greeks has moved to other countries for good. Those who stayed will have to deal with lower wages, higher taxes, and much less chance of getting ahead in the future. The lesson from Greece is very scary. The debt trap can still snap shut violently, even in the world's most advanced and integrated economic union. And when it does, the terrible cost to people is paid by regular people who never borrowed money in the first place, not by the bankers or politicians who made the mess. So why does this nightmare keep happening? Why do countries keep falling into the same trap if the pattern is so clear? The answer is that the incentives are not aligned properly. Politicians work in short periods of time between elections. 2 years, 4 years, or maybe 6 years at the most. Debt lasts for decades. A politician can borrow money to pay for popular programs, easily win re-election, and be out of office long before the bill is due. People who vote now get the benefits right away. The crisis will be passed down to future voters. The incentive structure is just as messed up and wrong for creditors. When a country borrows money, banks and bondholders make a lot of money from the interest payments. When the country can't pay, they ask international organizations like the IMF for money to help them out. Institutions that get money from taxpayers in rich countries, they win big if they get heads. Tails, the general public loses. And this bad cycle is getting worse and worse in recent years. Since 2020, a lot of countries have either failed to pay back their debts or changed the terms of their loans. Lebanon, Zambia, Ghana, and Sri Lanka. The list keeps getting longer. The COVID pandemic, along with high inflation and quickly rising interest rates, has pushed weak countries over the edge financially. The world is currently in debt for $307 trillion, which is a lot of money. The total amount of debt owed by the government, businesses, and households. That is 336% of the world's total GDP. There is no way that some of that debt will ever be paid back. The only real question is which countries will go bankrupt next and how bad the economic crisis will be. History gives us no comfort or peace of mind. Argentina is in crisis mode again. The value of Turkey's currency has dropped dramatically. Pakistan is very close to defaulting. And in rich, developed countries like the US, Japan, and Italy, debt levels are getting higher than anyone thought possible. The debt trap isn't something that happened a long time ago. It is the most important economic problem we face right now. And until we can find a way to make political incentives match long-term economic reality, countries will keep borrowing too much, spending too much, and falling apart. The only thing left to ask is, who's next? If you thought this in-depth look at the vicious cycle of debt and default was really interesting, hit that subscribe button right now. We'll talk about more economic disasters from the past, like the hyperinflation that ruined Zimbabwe and Venezuela. What should we talk about next when it comes to historical economic collapse? Please tell me in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.